So today we are continuing our discussion on Vedanta philosophy. We started 2 weeks back with one lecture on some of the vital aspects of Vedanta tradition. Now there is a special reason why I chose this subject, because as you know, there is a lot of speculation about the connection or the lack of connection between what we termed popular Hinduism and Vedanta. So it's of great historical and metaphysical significance to understand Vedanta philosophy. I begin with one quotation from Swami. He says in his Jnana Yoga lectures, which he delivered in London, it's a very interesting statement. What he says is this: from the highest flights of Vedanta philosophy to the lowest fetishism and totemism, the agnosticism of the Buddhists and atheism of Jains, each and all have a place in Hindu's faith. This is the famous statement from Vivekananda. This gives in a nutshell the relationship and connection, and also the evolution of Hindu philosophical. He says, from the highest flights of Vedanta philosophy, which makes it clear that Vedanta philosophy is the highest flight, the peak of Hindu spiritual philosophical evolution. You should remember not only philosophical but spiritual evolution, because Vedanta has got two aspects: the experience aspect and the philosophical aspects. Vedanta is a name of not just a philosophical system. Going beyond that, it is a and incidentally, this Vedantic state of experience is not limited to Hinduism. Wherever you find a reference to the higher mystical experience, where the human mind goes beyond rituals, ceremonies, external forms, dogmas and doctrines, and even philosophical systems, wherever you find any reference of inner experience, where the mind externals, the dogmas, and reaches the higher inner experience level, that's called Vedanta. In my informal study of Christian theological thought systems, being a non-Christian by birth, I have my limitations because I have to approach Christianity maybe from a Vedantic perspective. So when I read a statement in the gospel, like, I and my father, when you read Kant's concept of the higher experience, the Godhead, or when you read, especially in many of the Russian mystical traditions, of course there it is more of a devotional approach, but still you find that human mind, a spiritual seeker, reaches a level where he feels an inner bliss. And this bliss is not rooted in a philosophical conviction. It is rooted in a kind of experience of unity with God, in a way. In Hindu philosophical thought, especially in the Vedas and Upanishads, these ideas have been very, very systematically brought out, and Shankaracharya, who lived the 8th century, took all these ideas from Vedic literature, from the Upanishads, and formed them into a very compact, highly logical, rational philosophical system. And there Shankaracharya says, when you pray to God in any place of worship, when you meditate upon God, that takes you to the highest level of inner purity and devotion. That state of experience is not different from the experience of a spiritual seeker who follows the path of non-dualism. Because in non-dualistic system, your idea of God is one transcendental, attributeless, impersonal truth, not as a person sitting above the clouds and creates the world, but rather one all-pervading, immanent, omnipresent, transcendental, this is the theme of Shankaracharya. And the same Shankaracharya says, if you go to a church or a temple or a synagogue, and if you pray to God, if that prayer takes you beyond your external convictions, beyond dogmatism, beyond mechanical ritualism, if it takes you to the highest state of experience, that experience is non-different, it is not distinct from highest non-dualistic experience. So Advaita or non-dualism and devotion highest experience. I can quote from Shankaracharya. See, I mentioned in my last lecture that the author of the most profound, the most moving, touching, devotional poetry in Sanskrit literature is Shankaracharya. And if you read many of the books, especially Schweitzer, there have been a few translators who had done a tremendous injustice to Vedanta. If you read those books, you find they will say Vedanta doesn't give importance to morality. Vedanta doesn't give importance to emotion. Vedanta is a life-negating, world-negating system of such terrible statement to be made by translators who translate Advaitic text into English, saying that even Rudolf Otto's comparison of Eckhарт's philosophical system and Shankara's philosophy is one of the most wonderful books ever written in any European language. He originally wrote in German, and is a wonderful, marvelous translation into English. One of the most wonderful books written in Western world on Advaita. But he makes this mistake. He says Shankara's Advaita doesn't give importance. I'm quoting one statement from Shankaracharya's poetry. Of course, before I quote this, I can quote another interesting statement from his commentary on the Gita, Bhagavad Gita. In the Bhagavad Gita, on 13th chapter, 10th verse, Shankaracharya says, the highest devotion is pure devotion, unwavering. So, Maicha Ananya Yogena Bhaktihi Avibhijarini Vivikta Desha Sevittum Anabhirjana Samsadi. This is the statement. It comes in the 10th verse of 13th chapter, where the Gita is defining what is the highest devotion, purest devotion. It is faith seek a lonely place where you want to sit and meditate on God. Pure devotion. After defining what is purest devotion, pure devotion, Shankaracharya makes a statement in Sanskrit, Sacha Jnanam. You know what it means? That highest devotion is the highest knowledge. The highest devotion is the highest knowledge. So, Jnanam and Bhakti are the same. The highest thinker of our times who made those and highest knowledge are the same at the experience level. Now, while explaining devotion, Shankaracharya says, in one of his famous poetical work, that is in Sivananda Lahari, very graphic description of how our mind should automatically, spontaneously flow towards God. And he says that flow of our mind to God, spontaneous, natural, effortless flow of our mind to God, is also the highest Vedanta. So he says, Ija Santati Rajaskanta Lata Kshitiruham Sindhu Sarit Vallabham Prapnotiha Yatha Tatha Pashupatehi Padara Vindadvayam Cheto Vritti Rupetya Tishtadi Sada Sa Bhaktihi Iti Uchyade. This is devotion. This is the highest form of our devotion to God. This is how the verse concludes. What does the verse mean? It means this. As the seeds of Ankola tree, maybe it's a kind of, I don't know what it is called in English, because many of the trees may not be existing in winter. Outside the hot weather, maybe tropical regions. So anyway, it's a tree. When the seeds fall, because of their lightness, the seeds fly back towards the tree. That's the nature of the seed. So he says, as the seeds of Angola tree fly back to the tree from where they fall. So these seeds fall to the ground. They don't strike the ground. The seeds fly back to the tree from where it is falling. So as the seeds of Angola tree fly back to the tree from where the needle of drawn is drawn to the magnet. Will be automatically drawn towards the magnet. The needle doesn't have to work hard to be drawn towards the magnet. It is natural. The needle doesn't move any other direction except in the direction of the magnet. Like that, if our mind automatically, naturally, effortlessly flows towards God, that is pure devotion. If the seeds that fall from the tree automatically move back to the tree, that is devotion. As the virtuous wife, so effortlessly remains her loving husband, which is natural. As the creeper clings fast to the tree, these parasites, small little creepers, they are dependent upon the tree. This black pepper is an example. Many such creepers. They depend upon some big tree for their own sustenance and survival. As the creeper clings fast to the tree, and even as the river merges into the ocean, because the river flows down and the no effort on the part of the river to move to the ocean, because the river flows down. Again, the needle doesn't have to work hard to get drawn to the magnet. It is natural. If our thought reaches the lotus feet of the Lord and remains there forever, that indeed is devotion bhakti. So, and this Shankaracharya says, this highest, purest devotion is not distinct and not different from the highest Vedanta, the path of knowledge. Now, what I wanted to say was, many popular translations into English, especially many of the translations that happen in 20th century, very frequently Advaita or Vedanta as being misinterpreted as a system of dry philosophy which stresses some kind of inhuman, life-negating, world-negating asceticism. It is not so. Vedanta, on the one hand, is the most rational analysis of the reality behind everything that we see around us. On the other hand, it is also the highest devotion. It is the Vedanta principle combined with bhakti or devotion that saves us from fanaticism, which is natural to many of the bhakti cults, bhakti movements. You find many such cults. Wherever you find, my God is the only God. My dispensation, my cult, my group is the only group. All other groups are wrong or inferior. These people who follow this cult may be very sincere. They may fast maybe 5 days of the week, and they may practice a lot of scriptures, lot of prayer, also a lot of fanaticism. Because that devotion is not processed and refined by Vedantic principle. So when Vedanta and Bhakti come together, Bhakti itself becomes a universal spiritual idea. And when Vedanta and Bhakti come together, Vedanta itself becomes a very sublime humanistic spiritual ideal. Nothing dry about it, nothing life negating about it. I can give one grand example of how Bhakti, some devoid of Vedanta principle, can make us great fanatics. In India, there are many such cults. Swami Vivekananda himself refers to some Vaishnava cults and groups, very ascetic, all wonderful external signs, lot of fasting, lot of vegetarianism. But they would say, if you want to reach God, you should be vegetarian. If you want to reach God, you should have this particular mark, because God looks at your forehead. If you have this mark, God will admit you to His place. And if you are not a vegetarian, God will close His door in front of you. You should ask them, Jesus was a Jesus was non-vegetarian. Do you think God will admit Hitler and close the door before Jesus and Buddha? the point is, I'm giving the example. You find not only in India, even in the Russian mystical tradition, if you read The Way of a Pilgrim, and a pilgrim continues his journey, with R.M. French translation, the marvelous spiritual autobiography belonging to 19th century. It is one of the most famous, most marvelous devotional, mystical works. But when the Russian Orthodox Church monk taught the secret of unceasing prayer, don't believe all these yoga. See, yoga perhaps was becoming somewhat popular in Central Asian republics in 19th century, because Tolstoy himself had close acquaintance with many of the yoga principles. So even in the Pilgrim's Progress, you find a statement coming from the monk who taught the pilgrim the highest prayer, the unceasing prayer. And he says, there are a few disparaging statements about yoga, meditation, etc. Maybe we don't know whether he was referring to Buddhist meditation or whatever may be. Now the point is, the most sublime devotion can sometimes be mixed with little bit of fanaticism. If you want to remove fanaticism, you mix bhakti, devotion, with Vedantic universalism. That is the unique with the historical Now, if you read the history of Vedantic philosophy, and those of you who have no access to the original Sanskrit literature, I can recommend you many books. If you want to read the exposition of Vedanta from a teacher of great experience, you can read Swami Vivekananda. If you want to study in a purely academic academic fashion, you can read the works of Dr. Radhakrishnan, and also one famous Japanese scholar who wrote early history of Advaita Vedanta, Hajime Nakamura, was a famous scholar who spent almost 40 years studying Buddhism and Vedanta, who wrote a marvelous book. It's an expanded version of his great doctoral thesis on Vedanta, which runs into maybe more than 2,000 pages, which you can get from our own library. The early history of Advaita Vedanta. This is about the books. Anyway, now coming to the subject. If you look at the evolution of Indian thought, especially Vedantic thought, from Buddha's times to our own times, let us say Buddha stands at one end process, and between these two points, you find Shankaracharya. So total 2,400 years of evolution of Vedanta. That means 24 centuries. Because Buddha himself was actually trying to give a non-metaphysical and a deeply humanistic interpretation of Vedanta. Buddhism is nothing but a humanistic interpretation of Vedanta. Without focusing on the metaphysical ideas, Buddha focused on the humanistic, pragmatic and practical aspects of Vedanta philosophy. That's what you find in the Sutta Pitaka, which contains Dhammapada. The whole Dhammapada, which is part of Kuddhaka Nikaya, which is a Pali canonical literature, that's what you find in Dhammapada. Just a humanistic, pragmatic, practical interpretation of Vedanta philosophy. From Buddha to Shankara, it is 1200, roughly speaking. Buddha was born around 6th century BC, and in a way he was the contemporary of Thales, more or less. When Buddha was preaching in India, these great Greek thinkers were expounding their ideas in ancient Greece. From 6th century BC to 8th century AD, roughly speaking 1200 years. So during this time, a lot of important changes took place in the evolution of Vedanta philosophy. To begin with, Buddha came in 6th century BC, and he found the Vedantic ideals had become dry metaphysical system on the one hand, and on the other hand, it had degenerated into some kind of mechanical ritualism. The system of philosophy which focuses on mechanical ritualism is called the Mimamsa system. So when Buddha appeared, he found the time was ready for a revolt against many of the old orthodox ideas which are crept into Vedantic tradition. The great teachings of Sri Krishna, Lord Krishna, who taught the highest Vedanta philosophy, in the Bhagavad Gita, roughly speaking about 3200 BC, that's roughly speaking the age of Lord Krishna's preaching of Bhagavad Gita. Those great ideas which Krishna taught were completely forgotten. Lord Krishna embodied in the Gita the highest teachings of Upanishads and Vedantic texts from ancient scriptures. And he made a very, very simple, highly practical system of spiritual life, which was suitable for people of all temperaments. If you have an intellectual turn of mind, you can practice Jnana Yoga. If you are an active person, you can practice Karma Yoga. If you are by nature somewhat emotional, if you are a rational analyst of your own mind, gave a very systematic, very pragmatic interpretation of the Vedantic tradition, Vedanta philosophy in his Bhagavad Gita. But after about 2,800 years, when Buddha came, he found many of these great teachings were completely forgotten or they were highly distorted. So Buddha found that the time was ripe for a revolution not from outside, but a revolt Vedanta from outside. It was an internal reform system, reform movement from within. So Buddha discarded many of the old dogmatic ideas and rituals and ceremonies, and he focused on some of the practical ideas, methods like morality, ethics, some fundamental moral principles, ethical principles that everyone should follow, whether you believe in God or not. He did not expound a doctrine focusing on, he focused on life in this maybe profession. We can, living in this world, we can become spiritual, lead a spiritual life by practicing the 8 fundamental disciplines. We should be rooted on the idea that life in this world as we find is imperfect, which is called dukkha, grief. Grief really doesn't mean misery as we understand in the dictionary meaning of the word grief. What Buddha meant by grief was imperfection or incompleteness. This empirical life, living in this world, eating healthy food, that is good, that is necessary, but there is a higher meaning, higher relevance for human life. So he said this dukkha, chattvari arya satyani, 4 noble truths based on grief of dukkha. So there is a reason for this. If life in this world was perfect and complete in itself, then why should you get old and become weak? Why should you fall sick? And why should you die? And Buddha was confronted with these 3 terrible realities of life: old age, sickness, and death. So he said, life in this world so it should have a higher meaning. This path of higher meaning is called Ashtanga Yoga, 8 noble virtues, vows. Righteousness is the central principle. Right activity, right thought, right memory, right effort, so right speech, all these, everything should be based on righteousness. And then you can reach liberation, moksha. He did not speak about a God, and did not speak about a place of worship, and it also did not give special sanctity to any particular book. Taught some universal humanistic principles of life proper life. And he says, even if you do not believe in God, do not worry about God, if you live a proper life in this world, you can become spiritual. It is a very humanistic, practical, pragmatic interpretation of Upanishadic philosophy. Now from Buddha to Shankaracharya, it is 1200 years, 12 centuries. Now during this period, a lot of changes took place in Vedantic thought system. Changes took place in India and also outside India. On the one hand, Buddhism spread in many parts of the world, especially the Asian countries, like China, Japan, Cambodia, and other countries. see an advertisement of some Buddhist monk who came to India in the 6th century AD, who studied Pali and Sanskrit language and took with him a large number of Sanskrit scriptures, Pali canonical literature, took them back to China and translated these great books into Chinese language. You find in today's San Francisco Chronicle, in the advertisement for Chinese cultural program, you can find a reference to the great Chinese monk who came journey to the west, who came to India. The university is called Magadha University. So that's near today's Bihar, partly near Patna. So he took a large number of scriptures and spent the rest of his lifetime just for translating those Buddhist scriptures into Chinese language. So that means Buddhism got a global dimension. I mean, it became a popular religious tradition in many of the civilized countries of those times, like Japan, China, Cambodia, Thailand, many of the Asian countries. And also Sri Lanka, though the Chinese, Japanese version of Buddhism was called Mahayana, became popular in Burma. It's called Theravada, it's called Hinayana. Anyway, we are not going to those details. But within India, Buddhism underwent certain changes which did not happen outside India. So today, if you go to India, you find many great thinkers and philosophers, Hindu saints and sages and philosophers, who look upon Buddha as a great incarnation of God. The Buddha himself did not believe in incarnations or even God, so to speak. That's an interesting contrast. If you go to India, you find Buddha is looked upon as the 10th incarnation of Lord Vishnu. But Buddha is even in God. But what I want to say was this. In India, Buddhism underwent a lot of changes, transformations. On the one hand, it degenerated into some kind of cults. And many of these cults practiced a lot of rituals and ceremonies which were really not Vedantic in nature. Swami Vivekananda refers to many of these things. They built huge temples for Buddha. The Buddha himself did not want any temple to be built, in fact. But Buddhism did not die. Buddha also did not become irrelevant. Observed, and Buddha also observed into Buddhism was a revolt from within Hinduism. So that's why Vivekananda calls Buddha as a rebel child. He's a rebel, but he's child anyway. You don't reject a child. But Buddha's revolution, Buddha's revolt, Buddha's reform movement had a great significance, had a positive refining effect on Hinduism. Hinduism took back from Buddhism many of the practice used inside. So Buddha was observed, and many of the Buddhist teachings were also observed. For example, the Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path, the idea of nirvana and liberation, which is called moksha in Vedanta. All these ideas were observed in Hinduism. But Buddhist movement as a separate cult lost its need in the process of Vedantic evolution, which was initiated by Shankaracharya in 8th century AD. So that's why you find one of the most Lama, but you don't find a huge Buddhist movement in India. And many received with great honor and great respect when they fled from Tibet, from anywhere in the world. They were received, honored, given all protection, and they are treated as great saints. But at the same time, Buddhism as a separate religion lost its need to be a separate religion in India. This genius of observing even the teachings of a new reform movement was initiated by Shankaracharya too. Next process. So we have started from ancient times to Buddha, then Buddha to Shankaracharya. As I mentioned earlier, 24 centuries of Vedantic evolution, beginning with Buddha and ending with Sri Ramakrishna and Vivekananda in 19th century. With the result that today we are discussing Vedanta 12,000 miles away from the place where it was expounded and formulated into a compact metaphysical spiritual system by Shankaracharya in 8th century. It's all thanks to the new impetus, new definition given by Vivekananda, who taught and preached Vedanta based on the principles of ancient, but interpreted modern language that we all understand, based on the teachings of the life of teachings and life of Sri Ramakrishna. So what was the medium that Vivekananda used to teach Vedanta in modern times? The medium was the life and teachings of Sri Ramakrishna, who embodied all the great principles of Vedantic philosophy. Its universalism, its humanism, and also in metaphysical depth. Now we will begin with Shankaracharya's contribution. I already mentioned this in the last lecture. Now what Shankaracharya, he gave a well-defined, a well-structured philosophical edifice to Upanishadic literature. Before Shankaracharya, Vedantic ideal was well known, Vedantic way of life was well known, but how the Vedic literature expounded Vedantic principles, that was not so well known. Because if you look at the 4 Vedas and if you read them, it is so mind-boggling, and sometimes it could be very confusing also. You find ideas which are apparently contradictory to each other. It's not like reading a book which has a purpose at the very beginning of it, following a straitjacket logic, coming to a conclusion. That's not the style of Upanishads and Vedas. Upanishads constitute the most sublime and the highest principles of Vedic literature. But even in the Upanishads, there are many ideas which may appear to be mutually contradictory. So how to create a philosophical superstructure from this vast mass of Upanishadic literature? That was the task before Shankaracharya. So in fact, if you read many literally, if you read and you understand, if you just look at the literal meaning, it won't make much sense. Apparently, it won't make much sense. But if you read with the help of Shankaracharya's commentary, then everything falls into place to form a very compact, very systematic, a very logical metaphysical system with a great experience aspect. See, even while formulating this grand superstructure of metaphysical system based on the Upanishads, Shankaracharya goes on repeating again and again as a slogan. All these great teachings should lead us to our own inner experience. Though he was formulating such a sublime philosophical superstructure, he did not believe that philosophy will take you to the highest spiritual experience. He says philosophy cannot, in fact. That's what he says. Philosophy we need to remove wrong notions. We need the right notion. We need the right concept. We need the right ideas to remove wrong ideas. But right ideas, right concepts, right doctrines, right philosophy is not enough. Beyond the right concept, there is a right experience in the last of life. That's why I mentioned at the very beginning itself, Vedanta has got two dimensions: the philosophical dimension and the experience dimension. When you come to Sri Ramakrishna Vivekananda, 19th century, Sri Ramakrishna stressed the experience dimension because there was no need to write another commentary on the Upanishads, which Shankaracharya already done in 8th century. But again, many people have lost that a proper understanding of the importance of experience. Vedanta itself was a system. So 19th century, Ramakrishna did was, he himself said that Advaita is the highest highest understanding of God. In fact, if you want to get an idea of the relationship between Sri Ramakrishna's interpretation of Advaita, non-dualism, and Shankaracharya's interpretation and Vivekananda's interpretation, you can get a statement in Swami Turiyananda's letter. Swami Turiyananda incidentally had a very intimate contact. This movement here in California started with Shanti Ashrama, which was founded by Swami Turiyananda in 1900 in San Antonio Valley, nearly 100 miles away from here. He lived there for 2 years and he taught Vedanta and meditation, yoga, and Shankaracharya's works, his disciples, for almost 2 years. That Swami Turiyananda, in one of his letters, makes a very interesting statement. Remember, he was a great scholar and also a man of experience. So he says, Sri Ramakrishna stressed the bhakti, the devotion aspect of Vedanta, Shankaracharya stressed the jnanam or knowledge aspect of Vedanta, and Swami Vivekananda stressed the karma yoga aspect of Vedanta. Integrates Shankaracharya stressed the knowledge aspect. But remember, as I mentioned earlier, in every great statement where he stresses knowledge, he concludes with the idea, knowledge should take us to the highest experience. But the need of the hour in 8th century was to formulate a philosophical system, to create a metaphysical edifice from the forest of Upanishads and Vedas, with Shankaracharya. We start, and in 19th century, what Sri Ramakrishna Vivekananda together did was to give this ancient spiritual ideal, metaphysical thought system, a universal, a modernist interpretation, in a language, in a style that everyone in this world will understand. And once you understand this Vedantic principle, no matter what religion we belong to, or even if you are born atheist, you will understand that we have a spiritual dimension that goes beyond the physical, the mental, and the intellectual. So anyway, we will continue this discussion in the coming sessions. So we will continue this discussion of Vedanta philosophy and its evolution in the coming sessions. Thank you. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Harihi Om Tat Sat. Sri Ramakrishna Pranamastu. Statement in Swami Turiyananda's letter. Swami Turiyananda incidentally had a very intimate contact. This Vedantic movement here in California started with Shanti Ashrama, which was founded by Swami Turiyananda in 1900 in San Antonio Valley, nearly 100 miles away from here. He lived there for 2 years and he taught Vedanta and meditation, yoga, and Shankaracharya's works, his disciples, for almost 2 years. That Swami Turiyananda, in one of his letters, makes a very interesting statement. Remember, he was a great scholar and also a man of experience. So he says, Sri Ramakrishna stressed the bhakti, the devotion aspect of Vedanta. Shankaracharya stressed the jnanam or knowledge aspect of Vedanta, and Swami Vivekananda stressed the karma yoga aspect of Vedanta. Integrates Shankaracharya stressed the knowledge aspect. But remember, as I mentioned earlier, in every great statement where he stresses knowledge, he concludes with the idea, knowledge should take us to the highest experience. But the need of the hour in 8th century was to formulate a philosophical system, to create a metaphysical edifice from the forest of Upanishads and Vedas, with Shankaracharya. We start, and in 19th century, what Sri Ramakrishna Vivekananda together did was to give this ancient spiritual ideal, metaphysical thought system, a universal, a modernist interpretation, in a language, in a style that everyone in this world will understand. And once you understand this Vedantic principle, no matter what religion we belong to, or even if you are born atheist, you will understand that we have a spiritual dimension that goes beyond the physical, the mental, and the intellectual. So anyway, we will continue this discussion in the coming sessions. So we will continue this discussion of Vedanta philosophy and its evolution in the coming sessions. Thank you. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Harihi Om Tat Sat. Sri Ramakrishna Pranamastu.